Hola, konnichiwa, konbawa. Here's your lesson for today. It's the Spanish-American War, kids. And you can see plainly from this illustration that it features two countries, the United States and Cuba. What? Thought this was the Spanish-American War. There's clearly an American dude here. And if you know your flags like I know my flags, this is clearly a Cuban flag. So right away we're setting out to confuse you. The setting in this case is in Cuba. It is the Spanish-American War, and in the next 15 minutes or so you'll get a better understanding of it. While you're watching this award-winning video, please fill out the Idiot's Guide to the Spanish-American War. Now, while you're at home, don't think of yourself as an idiot, because that would be hurtful. Just think of yourself as a moron instead. Just kidding. By the time you get through this, you'll have most of what you need in order for us to spend some time on Friday getting to know the Spanish-American War in a little bit more detail. So here we go. Our first thing that we're going to look at are the main players. Take a look at this cartoon closely. Now I'm taking some things away. What is missing from the man's belt? Oh, you didn't see it the first time. Here. And back again. And back to me. And here you go. What is missing from the man's belt? And how was it labeled? What is the label on the man's hat? Think about it. Wait for it. Wait for it. And of course the answer is on this older man's hat. It says Spain. On the younger man's belt, although he kind of looks old too, it says the United States. Who's this down here who needs our help? Oh, it's Cuba. Second time that we've answered Cuba. Now, to understand this a little bit better, in class I was talking about two little dots on a map. And those two little dots were Jamestown and Plymouth, the first permanent settlements in what becomes the United States, but before that, of course, the 13 colonies. And as those two little dots grow, and Uncle Sam grew, it became a little bit older. Think about it this way. When it was the 13 colonies, America was like a teenager. And you know how teenagers can be. They try to get their way sometimes and get in sometimes fights with their parents, and maybe they got in a fight with England. Then when they were like 15 or 16, they expanded greatly through the Louisiana Purchase, and through their teenage years they kind of maybe fought along with the Indians, and as they were expanding they were getting tougher and tougher until Manifest Destiny was realized. Now Spain had been around for a long time. I'll show you that in a minute. But Spain basically now was an old man. They were about 80 years old, and we were like a teenager. So instead of picturing him here, I want you to picture America as, so America's more like this guy. About 18 years old, had a recent smash movie, and now is looking to prove how strong they were. What better way to prove that you're strong than by punching out an old person? Now, I don't really mean to prove that you're strong, go punch out an old person. But metaphorically speaking, Spain was about an 80-year-old person, and America was a teenager in the prime of its life. And we wanted to show how strong we were and that we could compete with European countries for power and land, so we wanted to punch out the 80-year-old. Again, this doesn't mean that you actually need to punch somebody out, because we love old people. I mean, look at us. There's Mr. Vroman and myself and Random Guy. You don't want to mess with any of these people. We're like Chuck Norris times 3. You know who you don't really want to mess with? Mr. Neighborgall. Hopefully you'll get a chance to meet with him later. He's an old guy. He could beat us all up by blinking his eye. And you don't want to mess with this guy because Mrs. Brown will kill you. Okay, back to the story. Spanish-American War. At one point, Spain owned basically most of the world over here in what is now South America, Central America, and North America. Little old Spain all the way over here had the foresight to say to Christopher Columbus, go ahead and make your journey. And off he went in 1492 to sail the ocean blue. And by 1770, here was the Spanish Empire. It was ginormous. The American Empire was tiny. Now looking at this more specifically in terms of Central and South America, you see all of that in the brown here is controlled by Spain. You have some Portuguese influence over here. But wanted to point out a couple of things that Spain controlled, like Cuba, third time we've heard that, and Haiti, and of course what becomes Florida. And on the global scale, I forgot to mention, not only did they control all of this here, but they also controlled the Philippines. So they controlled a large part of the world, but they were dying. Their empire was not what it once was. You'll see this in a clip in a moment. On the other hand, the United States was young, 18-year-old, and by the end of the Spanish-American War, they will emerge as a world power as a result of the victory over Spain in the Spanish-American War. And not only will we spread our wings from sea to shining sea, but now from the Philippines to the Caribbean and beyond. Now, before we get into the causes of the war, I want to point out something you'll see in these pictures. All of the cartoon people have beards or mustaches, because I know that you'd be interested in this. So keep score. 1, 2. Mr. Roman doesn't. Oh, random guy does. 3. And when we get over here, we'll start to see lots more like him. Now, I didn't say the kids had them. Okay, back to the story. I'm all over the place. The United States had economic interests, and public opinion often influenced U.S. involvement in international affairs. We kind of viewed ourselves sometimes, or the imperialists viewed ourselves, as school teachers who had to educate the uncivilized around the world on the proper way to do things. Now you look closely and you see maybe Cuba, and you see Guam, you see all the children here who aren't being very good, and Uncle Sam's going to teach them how to do the right thing so they can be civilized like these guys here. Now note the racism going on. You have an Indian over here off in the corner. This is the same time period as westward expansion, and you also have the area right after Reconstruction. A lot of things have been tied back to ideas of racism in this time period, and we'll certainly see those as we go. Now, more beards and mustaches coming. Oh wait, this guy doesn't have one, but this guy, Uncle Sam, does, and his friends over here have them. He is definitely expanding, and if you look at the side there, you see that he's eating Puerto Rico and Hawaii and California and Alaska and all those places, and his expansion is getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and these guys are telling him, go ahead and eat even more. So, now that we get the causes of the actual Spanish-American War, which once again happens where? Not in Spain. In America. No, not in America. In Cuba and in the Philippines. So, under the who on your Idiot's Guide to the Spanish-American War, you should have filled in Spain and the United States. When we get to the what, it's going to be a splendid little war. Splendid is spelled S-P-L-E-N-D-I-D-Z. One of those letters is not correct. The reason it's called a splendid little war is because it only lasts for about 5 months. It goes from April of 1898 to about August of 1898. Go ahead and put that in the when section. So unlike the other wars we'll be learning about this year, this one happened very quickly and was called a splendid little war. We'll learn more about that in class. Now, down to the reasons and how it leads to war. First reason is protection of American business interest or economic interest in Cuba. Now, to understand our economic interest in Cuba, we have to look at where Cuba is and why it's important to us. Cuba is just to the south of us, about 90 miles away. You might remember from the beginning of the year the story about Elian Gonzalez, the boy who was on a boat with his mother and some family friends, and they tried to make it to Florida, and everybody on the raft died except Elian. Cuba is only about 90 miles away from the United States, and Havana is here, the capital where many of the people are. The reason why we were so interested in what Cuba had to offer is because Cuba offers a lot of things that America doesn't have growing naturally. They have, amongst most important things of all, sugar. Lots and lots of sugar. They have other natural resources as well, from alcohol to tobacco to lots of things that are probably not fully always grown or able to be grown within the United States, and they were having it for very cheap prices. So there was a lot of American business interest there. Because there was a lot of American business interest there, we're going to send a ship down there to kind of protect it and keep an eye out on it in Havana Harbor, and that ship is the USS Maine, which we'll get to in a little bit. But we were very interested in what they had to sell. The only problem was the Spanish were not so happy that we were down there making these sales. Okay, reason number 2. American support of Cuban rebels to gain independence from Spain. Behold the phone. Check out the mustaches. All of these dudes are sporting awesome mustaches and awesome uniforms. But on a serious note, let's look at why this would actually be a cause of the Spanish-American War. The Americans saw the Cubans kind of like us 100 years before. In other words, We had a colonial oppressor, England. We wanted to get rid of them. We wrote them a nice love letter called the Declaration of Independence, which they ignored. We had to go to war with them to get our freedom. Same type of thing was happening with Cuba, but instead of them writing to England, they were asking Spain for their independence. Spain kind of liked the tobacco and alcohol and sugar and all the other good resources that Cuba had, and they didn't want to let them go. So the Cubans were rebelling against the Spanish, much like we had, much like George Washington had. And the Cubans actually play off of this and say things like, we are the Americans of 100 years ago. We are trying to have the revolution that you had and the success that you had. And in a lot of American press, we sided with them. They were the little guy going against the old man of Spain. But that being said, we also sometimes referred to them as racist and called them our little brown brothers. But that's cause number 2. And again, we're going to explore these in more detail in class. Reason number 3 is the butcher. Check out the mustache. Check out the gorilla. Okay? So, this guy here, his name is Valeriano Weyler, and he was from Spain. When they were having these rebellions, these revolutions, they needed somebody to come in and crush it. They picked on this dude. They sent him there to put the Cubans down. What he did was force them into concentration camps where they were often starved, disease set in, and somewhere between 100,000 and 200,000 Cubans were killed in these horrible situations. We started to hear about these situations through our newspapers, but we'll get to that in a moment. Number 4, the violation of the Monroe Doctrine. You should remember this from last year or from talking about it in class. Here are your European powers. You stay over there on this side of the pond. We'll stay on our side of the pond. You don't come make new colonies, we'll leave these colonies alone. The problem is Cuba is a Spanish colony and it's right in our backyard, and we didn't want them to stay, so maybe we were looking for a fight. The number 1 reason why, as we're going to see, probably is the sinking of the USS Maine in Havana Harbor of Cuba. February 15th, 1898, 8:30 at night. Mysterious explosion causes 215 American sailors to die. We weren't really sure what happened. There are 3 different theories which you'll be hearing about as to what might have caused this, but we didn't really know. But why not call on our friend Yellow Journalism to find out what they think happened? Yellow Journalism is exaggerating news stories, making things up even, to try to sell newspapers. These 2 guys, William Randolph Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer, really wanted a war, because if there was a war, people would buy newspapers to read about it. So they were pushing for war. They wanted it, and this is where we start to hear about yellow journalism. This is the Yellow Kid. The Yellow Kid was a character in one of the newspapers, and he actually was yellow, and when it rained, this would make its way through the newsprint, turning the whole newspaper yellow. Yellow journalism is exaggerating stories, using big headlines and pictures, and sometimes they're a little bit misleading. Maine explosion caused by bomb or torpedo? We weren't really sure what caused it, but we decided to kind of exaggerate it. Sometimes they would just use random pictures of monkeys. They loved putting pictures of monkeys back then. And they would say, Maine sailors murdered by Spain. But we didn't really know if that was the cause, and the Spanish brute was what was shown here. One more cause to throw on there is Enrique de Lome letter. Enrique Dupuy. He was a Spanish ambassador who wrote to another Spanish ambassador and basically said that the United States was too weak to go to war, we would never go to war, and the president at the time, McKinley, was going to avoid war under any cause. And of course, if you're going to say that about somebody and it ends up in the newspaper, it's going to do the opposite and lead them to war. So all of these factors lead President McKinley to declare war on Spain in 1898. And again, this was a very quick overview. In class, you're going to see some videos to kind of back this up, and then we're going to play a fabulous game called War with Spain, Who's to Blame? Before we do, though, a song. And the reason why I play the song is everybody remembers the Maine. They forget about the other causes, but it was all about the battleship of Maine.
All of the Caribbean. He wanted a naval base in the Spanish colony of the Philippines.
McKinley called for volunteers, then I got my gun. First Spaniard I saw coming, I shot him on the run. It was all about that